the recording. So we're recording now, and I'm going to share just a screen here and so I want to welcome you all for coming to our COVID-19 related research showcase. I'm Peggy Papathakis. I'm on the executive board for the Center for Health Research, and then we have two sessions going concurrently. We hope you find that this will be a fun and stimulating showcase that we've planned for you. I was on the committee to review all the abstracts, and when we came up with this idea for this topic, we had no idea, would it be 3 people who would submit or not, but we got, I think, 21 submissions, so we're really excited to share the ones that, unfortunately, we couldn't select them all. So we had a lot of great submissions, and we are presenting today those across the entire campus. So we have representatives between the 2 presentations from all the colleges. You all should have access to that chat where the links are. I'll share it again at the end. And so our track, so the first track that we're not doing, I guess I should say it's the parallel track, has to do with topics on health impact. So there's those 6 there. And then our track here has to do with education and social factors. And there's the list of different topics there. So thank you for attending this. Before we begin, I just wanted to mention a couple things about the Center for Health Research in case you're not aware. The mission of the center is to facilitate transdisciplinary research in the prevention and treatment of chronic diseases. And we know that those are the leading causes of death and disability in the United States. And a core value of the center is to promote health equity and improved quality of life across the lifespan. Minoritized populations, especially with obesity and chronic diseases, are more likely than other people to be affected by COVID. So we thought this was a natural topic for the center to host for this, this research seminar. And if you aren't yet involved with the Center for Health Research, I encourage you to take a minute to become affiliated with it. The link is on the slide that I'll again share at the end, but there's a link there to the Center for Health Research. If you want to have your research associated, you can find out more about that. So then on to the structure, we have 6 presenters, and we invite you to give your presentation 7 to 10 minutes. And then we have 5 minutes that we allow for questions. And you can put your questions directly into the chat, which after the completion of the presentation, the speaker can choose some of those, or you could ask them, unmute yourself and ask those orally. So I'm going to be a strict time master, so we can all, some people come in and out for different presentations, and so we want to be directly on time. So we are actually maybe a minute ahead of schedule. So I'll stop my share, and we will have our first presenter. And then the second presenter, go ahead and just, go ahead after the first presenter has stopped sharing. You can load yours and go ahead and begin. All right, so I welcome our first presenter, which will be Sarah Bartlett and Skye Bergman.
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming to watch this today. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see that? All
Yes.
right, good. Thanks, Skye. All right, so yes, I'm Sarah Bartlett, and I'm with the Psychology and Child Development Department, and I'm here with Skye Bergman, who's with Art and Design. And we're here to talk about some research on intergenerational service learning in the time of COVID-19. So just really briefly, this is research going on in Psychology of Aging, which is an upper division major elective and GE course. And service learning, particularly intergenerational service learning, is a pedagogical strategy that's used oftentimes in gerontology classes to basically expose students to the world of aging and to help them apply what they're learning in the classroom in a kind of real world context. And it also has a lot of benefits for older adults because it provides interaction with younger generations, and social isolation can be alleviated when students go out and participate in these programs in the environment. So the project we're going to talk about is called the Liveswell Lived Project, and it's based off of a film that Skye beautifully created with the same name, Liveswell Lived. And I had a student alert me to this movie, and I went and saw it several years ago and just fell in love with it. It's just such a wonderful example of successful aging, which is this concept that older adults can still be actively engaged and really involved in their communities. And that's exactly the kind of image I'm trying to portray to my students to counteract a lot of the negative stereotypes that they have coming in. So using Cal Poly's Learn by Doing motto, Skye and I created a program where we send students out into the community to different assisted living facilities. And we formed a project around the concept of living a life well lived from Skye's film. So before we talk more about the project, Skye is going to talk about the film itself.
So if you can go to the next slide. The film that I created was really out of a love of my grandmother, who at the time that I started the filming was turning 100 years old and still working out at the gym. And I was looking at approaching 50 and wanting to live like she did. And so I set out, and you're going to go to the next slide, to interview 40, I found 40 people, and I took 4 years to interview 40 people that were 75 to 100. So 3,000 years of collective life experience. And you can go to the next slide. And what a gift it was to turn off all devices and just really listen for 4 years and make those connections. Next slide. And one of the things that I found was that I learned so much. It wasn't just about their words of wisdom, but also about their stories and their legacies. And next slide. But the most important thing was really the connections that I made to these people. And I kind of took that for granted because I had that connection with my grandparents. And you can go to the next slide. And so when Sarah approached me about doing this project, I thought what a great gift this would be to incorporate the film, which kind of sets the stage and is the catalyst to create these connections that happen. So you can go to the next slide, and I think you could take over from here.
All right. Wow, that was lightning fast. Thanks, guys. So the Liveswell Live project was born, and basically what it involves is 5 service learning encounters per quarter for each class. And in the first one, when we do it in person, we have the students go out to a local retirement community, and we all watch Liveswell Live together. And then Skye does a question and answer, and we have kind of a meet and mingle time. And then after that, I randomly pair 1 to 2 students with an older adult, and they meet 3 times throughout the quarter. And these are some pictures of some of these interviews. They interview one another using the same questions that Skye used to interview folks for her film. So the questions revolve around living a life well lived. So proudest accomplishments, regrets, words of wisdom, advice, all kinds of pretty deep topics. So these dyads or triads tend to get close pretty quickly. The students also take what they've learned and they make a memoir for the older adult that they give them as a gift. And then Skye would do a professional photo shoot where she would take these great photos of the pairs or the triads. And then that really just kind of brought out that physical example of these relationships that were being formed. And then at the end, we'd have a wrap party, and the students would give presentations and everyone would sort of celebrate the end of the project. So when COVID hit, we had to pivot like many people have, and we took the whole program online. We joined with an online technology community for seniors called Senior Planet. It's a program of AARP, and everyone would watch the film on their own, and then we'd have a virtual kickoff. We'd still match students with older adults, but they do it all over Zoom, and then we would have a wrap party over Zoom as well. We obviously couldn't do the professional photo shoot, so we settled for screenshots, but tried to recreate the same sort of program. So what I'm doing research on is to see if the virtual program is as effective as the in-person version of the program in terms of increasing knowledge about aging, changing attitudes about the aging process, and reducing ageism. So I previously did a study where I compared the Liveswell Live project to a less involved service learning project that I'd previously done in my classes. And it was shown to be more effective in a few areas, but now we're trying to see, can this be duplicated virtually with the same amount of success? So if you want, I can email folks the PowerPoint. I have like a full literature review. I have information on the research design and the data analysis. I'm basically doing a pre-test, post-test with both some scales measuring the constructs I just mentioned, and then qualitative questions to kind of get a feel for why and how the students think the program might be working for them or not. So I have all the results from the in-person version in the slides, but what I thought I would do today is just skip to some of the preliminary qualitative results. So you can see some of the quotes here. This is from the virtual version. I'm collecting data all academic year, and then we'll review it in aggregate this summer. But as you can see, like one student said, it was a great experience getting to know the older adult I was assigned to. I liked the fact that I could form a real connection with an older adult without dealing with all the social factors of not being able to socialize with an older adult. So as you all probably remember, older adults were one of our most isolated groups during COVID-19 because they were so susceptible to COVID-19. So this was a way to get around that, and everyone, including the older adults, really enjoyed having this interaction. Students also talked about being able to socialize with someone in a different geographic location. So because Senior Planet's virtual, there were older adults not only in California, but in Colorado, New York, Wyoming, Alaska. So students thought that was pretty neat to get to know someone in a different area of the country. And then I really like this quote here. The student said, aspects I liked were being able to connect with someone else during the pandemic and having the opportunity to learn about their life experiences of another person. So sadly, some of the students said, and it's also joyfully, I guess, too, some students said this was the first new relationship they'd formed since COVID started because they were isolated, they were with their families, they were in asynchronous classes, and so they really enjoyed just having the chance to get to know someone kind of at that level of relationship. So other students, you know, they wish that it had been in person, and we hear the same thing that they're saying about their classes. I mean, obviously we all wish that we were in person. So we'll see if that was a real barrier to having the program be effective. So just in conclusion, previous research I've done has shown that this Liveswell Lived project does offer additional benefits over kind of a more limited service learning program. It really comes down to relationships, to the relationships that are formed. And so I hope to find out soon if this relational element is achievable in the virtual format. So here's our contact information. Like I said, I'll have more information on the results later this summer, so feel free to reach out to me or for the PowerPoint. And I have Skye's information there too, as well as the link for the film. So thank you. Did I make it?
You did, and you have a minute to spare, so
wow.
about the full 5 minutes for questions. Most of the comments in the chat were very positive. They weren't questions, however, so you know that they you know appreciated the links and all the photos in your PowerPoint. So so that for that. But how about questions?
And I should say too, all those photos are courtesy of Skye. She's an amazing photographer, and the students loved getting their photos taken at a professional photo shoot, as did the older adults. I mean, it was really fun to get to see that aspect of it. So that's one part we miss in the online version.
I'll ask one question, which is, what kinds of impacts on students or the elderly are you comparing in the pre and post COVID, you know, the virtual versus the in-person? I know you had their impressions of, you know, liking the opportunity, but I was just wondering about other kinds of aspects, kinds of things that you're going to try and compare.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a scale that measures knowledge, and not just like factual knowledge, but whether knowledge is tainted by bias. And so that's called the Facts on Aging quiz. And so I'm going to compare if there was a similar reduction in net bias between the two groups. So that's for the knowledge aspect. And then for attitudes, there's a really old scale that's been used a lot that measures like what kind of attitude shift do students have about aging? And it's mostly like cognitive, attitude based, and see if there's any difference between the two groups on that. And then for ageism, there's one specific aspect of ageism called, it's basically stereotypes. So it's kind of looking at, can people get past negative stereotypes and really form a true connection? And that was one of the few significant results from the quantitative data from the first version of the program. So seeing if that shows in this version of the program as well. So that's what I'm trying to compare. And then also looking at if some of the qualitative themes that came up before come up after. So.
It looks like Dr. Thomas has his hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. This is a very interesting presentation. One of my areas is life course and as it relates to physical activity and healthy development. And so I'm interested in, I think, the assessment part of from the student's perspective. In that stage, are there plans or could you tell us a little bit more about the wrap-up presentation? And then could you share if there are plans around creative forms of reflection and expression that you have not yet used?
Sure. So for the wrap-up party, they do, well, this is one thing that's changed. In the in-person version, when we had a little bit more time, they'd have a 2 to 3 minute presentation, and it's centered around 3 main questions. The first one is, what did you learn or what did you take away from doing this project? The second question is, what is your definition of a life well lived? And then the third question is, what is the older adult's definition of a life well lived? And because the project kind of centered around that theme, we thought it was important that students really walk away with having really developed some kind of an answer, at least for right now, of what that means to them. And it also kind of shows the depth at which they interacted with the older adult. So that's for the presentation. In the online version, we've had to shorten it just a little bit to about 1 to 2 minutes, just because we feel like people have a harder time sitting on Zoom for as long as they might in a physical location, but they're basically still touching on the same topics. And then what they do for reflection throughout the quarter is every time they have a service learning encounter, they write a reflection paper where they talk about their observations, thoughts, and feelings about the interaction, and then they have to tie it back to at least 2 course concepts that they've learned in the classroom. So they do that kind of ongoing throughout the quarter. There was one other aspect to your question, Dr. Thomas.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity for a 2-parter. Could you tell us any ideas that you might have for creative expression? So beyond presenting responses to the 3 questions, are there other creative modalities that you're thinking about or that you've considered as a kind of summation of their experiences or what they're taking away related to those questions?
In terms of takeaways, probably not. It's mostly the term paper and the presentation. Where their creativity really shines is in the memoirs. So they do get to take what they've learned about the older adult and create some kind of a project that they give to the older adult as kind of a thank you for the interaction. And I've seen a ton of creativity come out with that. So it started out the first time I did this as a pilot project, I just kind of told students, I'm not very creative. So the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, take a copy of the transcript from the interview, type it up and put a pretty cover on it. And the students actually taught me, about the creative aspect of this. And somebody said, well, can I do a scrapbook of their life? And can I do a digital scrapbook? How about I'm a poet? Can I write a poem that encapsulates their life? And so I just started saying, sure, bring it on, whatever modality of creativity works for you. And we've had original paintings. We had a student record herself playing guitar and singing a song that the person enjoyed. So it's been kind of all over the map. So I guess in terms of creative expression, it's been more through this memoir gift for the older adult. So that's been nice, but I'd be interested if there's another way to take that creativity and harness it to apply to what they've actually learned from the class too. That would be great.
All right, well, thank you. And also thank you for reminding us that we learn so much from our students as well, right? I mean, so I definitely appreciate that as well, especially during this time of COVID. Not only we learn lots of new things too. So, all right, well, thank you very much. That was a really interesting and wonderful presentation, and fabulous to see Skye's film in action. I think that's a really cool application of that work. So, all right, so we're going to move on to our second presentation. And Samantha, I believe, is going to be, Samantha Gill will be our presenter. And so on student perceptions of rapid transition to emergency remote learning in cafes. Take it away.
Right. Thank you, Peggy. I cannot see any of you. My Zoom is acting really weird, no matter what screen I put them on. So if you have a question, just shout it out. So you can see there's several people represented and several departments. Myself and Yamina and Gordon and Deirdre are in Natural Resources Management, Environmental Sciences. GW and I are both in ag engineering. Christina is in ag business. Anne is in ag communications. Peggy's in food science and nutrition, and Robin's in horticulture and crop science. So we had almost all of the departments represented. We wanted to see how effective online learning was for hands-on. We learn by doing. Many students we believe would struggle with online courses. Faculty and students both value face-to-face. Quality learning begins with quality online learning needs significant preparation. If it's a normal year, it goes through a lot of vetting through CSU, but that's not what happened last year. As you all know, we were forced into this. We didn't have time to prepare. We had about a week. Many faculty lack the pedagogical expertise and practical experience. So baseline instruction is presented. Students didn't choose to take an online course. And how is learn by doing applied in an emergency remote teaching environment? So our objectives were to understand how students perceived this quick change, evaluate the role of course type. We had lecture, activities, and labs all presented. Our hypotheses were that students would negatively perceive the ERT experience, and that the method of delivery, synchronous versus asynchronous, would have an impact on the perceptions of ERT. Unfortunately, I don't have time to present that part today. We sampled undergraduate and graduate students, but I'll just be talking about undergrads. We had demographic information, usefulness of content delivery, perceptions of support, and perceived impacts on learning outcomes. So we had some descriptive statistics, and we also used a chi-square analysis to test the differences across course types, that being lectures, labs, and activities. Students were asked to pick one support or major course to answer questions about. We had a Likert scale that had 5 levels: strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree, but we grouped the strongly disagree and disagree together, and agree and strongly agree together, or similarly very ineffective and ineffective, or so, just for the analysis. So what did students think? So you can see that one of the first questions was course alignment. Were the assessments fair? You can see they're kind of all over the place. 42% said they were fair and 22% said they weren't. I'm not sure how this would compare to a normal, in-person year, but I know that students don't always think what we do is fair. Learning units were presented clearly. It was nice to see that almost 85% of the students said yes. Navigation between learning materials and the website was comfortable. That one did have a significant difference across lecture, lab, and activities. It's the only one in this list that did, but still almost 83% said they were comfortable with it. Of course, they may have been comfortable with Canvas before spring. Course structure and requirements were clear, mostly said yes, and 74% almost 75% said guidelines were clear. What about their perceptions of motivation? So my instructor had empathy for the challenge. It was nice to see that the instructors in cafes, for the most part, were empathetic to the difficulties of our students. They believed that they were not able to interact with their professor as much as if it was in person, right? 76% said they could not interact with their professor, which is not as not really surprising. They believe that they're able to participate and interact with peers as much as in class. That one kind of surprised me. I would have thought they said no. They were connected to their professor. They're kind of all over the place, but more disagreed that they were connected. And this one was significant at the 0.01 level for a difference between lecture, lab, and activities. I think they thought they needed more interactions with labs. I believe they had the same educational opportunities, kind of all over the place, not too surprising. And they felt motivated to study for the class. About 63% said yes. Although when I asked my classes at the end of the quarter, they all said one thing they learned from going to this was that they needed to work on time management. What were their perceptions of the content? They did not think that faculty provided quality online instruction. And this is one of the things we were looking at. What did they think of going online? Well, they don't think almost 68% said that the instructors did not provide quality online assessment, but they did believe that professors were available when they had questions, although that was significantly different at 0.05 alpha across lecture, lab, and activity. The availability of online content helped me with time management. So that was nice to see, 78% did. And then the professor provided the ideal quantity of instruction. They disagreed. Doesn't say, we don't know whether they thought they needed more instruction or less instruction, but 70% of them said that we did not have the right quantity. Some open-ended questions. We asked them how their lab activities were completed. And as you can see, the professors in cafes became very creative. We had home-based experiments. We had discussion of lab activity based on videos created by the instructor. I know some soil science instructors took videos out into soil pits. PowerPoint pictures of step-by-step and synchronous Zoom meetings discussing an experiment. There were photos of cow judging. There were sent home lab kits to perform labs. They had to download apps on phones to enable them to go out and do surveying assignments. They had online videos of activities. So what are our conclusions? Students had a negative perception of emergency remote teaching. They did not like it. That was across all our course types. Over 2/3 of participants did not agree that their instructor provided the ideal quantity or quality of learning relative to face-to-face. Most preferred method of delivery were pre-recorded lectures and live Zoom classes. Students had somewhat negative perceptions of discussions. Nearly 2/3 of participants perceived online group work to be less effective than in person. We decided faculty needed training to effectively implement the discussion boards. Most of us aren't quite sure how to do that. Synchronous discussions allow better interactions. It's important to maintain some synchronous contact. Students did like to be able to see the professors, and we need to manage expectations. Faculty need to emphasize that doing will increasingly require digital technology. So just because it's online doesn't mean it's not doing. So we've done a really good job of selling Learn by Doing to our students. They pre-select Cal Poly and cafes because they want to learn by doing, and they didn't perceive online as learn by doing. So learn by doing facilitates the concrete learning experiences and teach marketable skills. So With that, are there any questions? And I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see people.
Thank
So,
you, Samantha, for
yeah.
that summary. You were right on time with your time, so that's great. We have about 5 minutes to do any discussion.
So there is a question about demographics for this project. And yes, we did collect a great deal of demographic information. I just didn't have time to present it in this presentation. We also collected information on food security and economic hardships because of COVID.
Samantha, do you mind saying the representation of students across the college about?
I know that it was, I don't have it in front of me. It was fairly representative. There were more from the departments that were represented by the faculty. So natural resources management had more than the equal proportion within cafes, and some of the other departments did. I think animal science didn't have as many because there wasn't anyone from animal science in our group. Many faculty members bribed their students to fill this out by giving them extra credit. So we did have a little bit of a disproportion, but it wasn't extreme.
And I think it was more female than male respondents as well, but that I thought is consistent with the college, that there's a higher proportion of females in the college overall. So that wasn't,
Yeah,
that was in line.
I see Deirdre nodding her head. She did the statistical analysis, so she would know. Question, Dr. Thomas, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you for recognizing my hand. So it sounds like the results kind of affirm what you expected, that students would prefer in-person learning over online. Could you talk about the unexpected results, in particular, this idea of accessibility to their instructors and the fact that they felt they can connect with their peers?
Well, those really surprised me. I think this is more anecdotal than anything that was in the survey, but I think the faculty did a good job of making themselves available via email. I know I've talked to faculty who answered emails way more often during this COVID time period than when it wasn't COVID. I know I answer emails 7 days a week, pretty much from when I get up to when I go to bed. And so I think that's the availability, and I can't speak to why they felt connected to their peers. Deirdre just unmuted herself, so maybe she has some comments.
So I think it's probably a combination of two things. Is there's a lot of incidental contact that we have with our students in class, after class, in the hallways, that may increase the perception of availability, that once COVID hit, you literally were not here and had to be intentional about making contact with your faculty members. I think maybe the student part is, I think a lot of faculty started to engage in group projects as part of their modality, and that might have helped with the perception of that contact with their fellow students, is that group time that might have been cropping up. Yeah. So I think that's kind of where those two, I think the lack of incidental running into your faculty may increase the perception of a lack of connection and contact, in a way that if you've only been in, most students had some very limited experience with an online class. Most of them had taken like one over the course of their education. So their perception of what contact in an online class looks like was probably very different than the realities of online learning. So I think that's kind of where that came in.
Yeah, I know with my classes, they've all set up group me's also. So they also had that interaction with each other outside of the class structure.
And I think a lot of students kind of do that anyways. I know when I've taken classes at Cal Poly, a lot of classes have group me's as well. And so that creates that opportunity for interaction that they already had in play in a digital way. that we didn't necessarily have to be intentional about creating.
Thank you.
All right. So we are right on schedule. Thank you very much for another interesting presentation. So now our third speaker, I believe it's Rose, Hildebrandt, Julieta, Moreno, Kathleen Brady. So if you want to go ahead and start your presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rose, and this is also Julieta and Kat, and we are fourth year architecture majors, a part of the College of Architecture and Environmental Design. And along with our instructor, Kelly Brooks, we've put together this presentation to showcase our research on and design work ideas about implementing outdoor learning for elementary school students in light of COVID-19. Today, we're going to talk with you about outdoor learning and its values and benefits, especially those that are evident because of COVID-19. We will also talk about our work with Creston Elementary and our hopes for possible implementation of these tactics at schools across California. To begin, a quick definition of outdoor education or outdoor learning as experiential learning within, for, or about the outdoor and natural environment. To differentiate, environmental education uses nature as the tool for learning, compared to learning outside, where typical indoor instruction is simply brought outdoors, which is more of what we have seen with COVID-19. To accomplish this, teachers will need support in modifying spaces and curriculum, although it does not necessarily mean making curriculum environmental. We also wanted to highlight the way outdoor learning fosters spaces where students can become leaders in their learning and offer opportunities for creativity in non-traditional ways. As research during the pandemic has shown us, being outdoors weakens disease transmission, contributing to the overall health and well-being of students and teachers. Going beyond COVID-19, it provides opportunities for students to develop essential and positive relationships with themselves, with peers, and with the environment. On a more individual scale, we have found that there are academic, health, and physical and mental well-being benefits. Because of COVID-19, implementing outdoor learning has become a pressing goal, focused on the speed and urgency of getting kids back in school as quickly as possible. There has been more exciting possibilities for outdoor learning because of related grants and funds. However, we also believe the strategies being implemented to address COVID-19 issues are not being designed to last forever, which creates a place of focus for further action and necessary work. This is where Green Schoolyards America comes into the picture. This is a national organization with the goal of transforming elementary school spaces into green spaces, to provide opportunities in the areas of learning, play, and ecological health of communities. The program is focused on improving child well-being and prioritizes diversity and equity. Here's an example of some of the exciting work that's being done by Green Schoolyards at an elementary school in San Francisco, California, and the before and after renovation. Green Schoolyards has created the National COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative, fostering implementation of outdoor spaces with the urgency of COVID-19 at the forefront, and then with hopes for implementation beyond this year. Volunteers working on the initiative have done lots of research on the topic, provided workshops, policy guidance, funding, and much more. The initiative is also focused on addressing racial and income disparities that have become even more evident and harmful because of COVID-19. We're going to zoom in and focus on Creston Elementary School in Atascadero, California, which Green Schoolyards matched our team with through their initiative volunteer program. Creston's justification for improving outdoor learning was to improve student attendance and student engagement. Although we are not raw researchers, what we have gathered from the Green Schoolyard source, interviews with educators, and our architectural education has informed the following architectural solutions.
Thanks, Rose. I'll talk to you about what Cal Poly has done to help Creston through the volunteer initiative and beyond. So first I'll talk about the site assessment work that we've done, what we did with that information, and what Creston has done with our proposals. So in the fall quarter, a group of students did a site assessment which identified green spaces on Creston's campus. The goal was to get Creston students back on campus as quickly as possible by providing some sort of solutions that the campus could easily implement with things they already had or could easily obtain. After this, we took on the project and reassessed the campus to further analyze what was already working for them, what areas might need a little more sparkle. Specifically, we were looking for spaces that were being used to that weren't being used to their maximum potential, in addition to neglected spaces on the campus that could potentially provide great learning areas for students. So these proposals were in areas 6, 9, and 3, which are the smaller boxes on this map. I'll only explain 2 today, though. So area 9 was previously an abandoned planter box filled with bark, which is located adjacent to the heart of the campus. So this is a case of a neglected area. What we suggested here was for Creston to install this elongated bench with storage underneath that students could sit on and store some of their supplies in the cubbies while they were in class or maybe hang out during lunch. This is a learning space not specifically tailored to any type of subject like math or art, but rather provides a space for teachers to take their class outside when they see fit. Area 3 is a case where we saw Creston already doing some great work to implement learning outdoors by having plans to extend their school garden and make this space more tailored for learning. So what we proposed here is to create a more formal setting for an outdoor classroom. We gave them quotes on weatherproof whiteboards, tables, other furniture that they could use. But ultimately what we suggested as the first step to improve this space was to level out the sides of the existing pergola walkway, fill it in with decomposed granite, put up a fence for safety reasons, and voila, you have a space that can be used for greater group discussion or other events. After these more urgent projects, we saw that other areas on the campus could be utilized to assess other ways of learning that provide students with a more well-rounded experience at school, whether that means creating a space for an alternative mode of learning or a space for students to de-stress. Ultimately, these prototypes would be more infrastructural. So this first prototype project is our stair installation located in the courtyard. These stairs are typically used for morning assemblies and act as a general gathering space for students during the day. So what this design does is activate that space by providing seats and tables for students to use during other times of the day when these stairs wouldn't be otherwise used. The second prototype is also located in the courtyard. This acts as a sensory path where students can gather during lunchtimes, or really any time of day, morning or after school, or even during a break to de-stress. These planter seats come in different sizes, and they're able to be rearranged to create seating clusters or one big seating cluster where students have agency on how to rearrange and how to use the space really. The planters not only break up the courtyard to host more people, but also provide some form of immediate sensory connection to nature, which has proven to be very beneficial, especially for young children in schools.
And now I'll talk about the current work we're working on, which involves prototypes for a pathway, an outdoor classroom, and inhabitable walls. And so for our first prototype, this is for students with learning adversities. And so they can learn through unrestricted movements and with sensory touch and hearing. So for the first part, the sensory number path, we have a number path where kids can learn through like touch and feel with different textures and also being outside and around nature. And they can move around and navigate their own path. And with the vertical bars and circulation path, they become more independent, deciding where they want to go and also being surrounded by their teachers who can sit on these benches and also engage with the students. Next, we have the outdoor classroom, and this can be used for various social and classroom activities. It also has a breakout area. So we have the main classroom area, and then if kids choose to circulate around it, they have the breakout space as well, and it has access to the garden. And then we have the third space, which is the inhabitable walls. And these are used for students to give them a sense of agency and to choose their own activity, whether it be in groups or simply just sitting in silence. And these also provide spaces for de-stressing and have a sensory connection to nature and through the materials. And we hope that these design strategies will be implemented across campuses around California.
In conclusion, COVID-19 has spurred the need for outdoor learning. Further establishment of outdoor learning will continue to promote health, care, and well-being for individuals and the environment. COVID-19 has made these topics more relevant, but focus should remain on long-term implementation that can contribute to the quality infrastructure and positive identity of a school as a place where students want to be and learn. Here's some feedback we got from Creston Elementary School about the impact on the identity of their school. And we thank you for choosing us to be a part of the showcase. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you for the comments in the chat, but we can also take questions now too.
All right, thank you very much. That was excellent and lovely to have students being presenters as well. I think that's fabulous. And so I don't see any hands up. I see clapping and cheering. Oh yes, Dr. Jaffra Thomas.
Yes, I'll get us started. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm reminded of universal design for learning that's implemented in physical education courses, not as often, but it's something that's been given some attention. And so I'm wondering, as you thought about the architectural design and improving the use of space for outdoor learning, I'm wondering what your thoughts are of considering how that might link into the principles of universal design for learning for supporting self-directed and autonomous learning, using multiple forms of representation, engagement, etc.
Mm-hmm. I can speak on that topic. And so Creston Elementary, they had a hard time with getting students to be more engaged in learning because they're like, I don't want to stare at a screen. And so by providing these outdoor facilities, they were able to interact with the students and get the kids excited to be at school. And also, I think with outdoor learning and learning through experience, it gives kids a sense of agency and they're excited about different subjects because it's not just you're sitting down in a class, you're learning through different movements. But if Rose or Julieta wants to touch on that aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that giving the kids agency and being able to kind of choose the path that they're learning and giving them leadership in that is a really cool idea that I think we've started to implement in some of the design work we've been doing. And so we've talked kind of about what it looks like for kids to be able to go on a journey and kind of pick one way and then maybe another time be able to pick another layer to that pathway. And so those are some of the things we've thought about, but definitely an interesting and kind of advantage that can be seen through outdoor education.
I have a question. Do you have any idea if some of the COVID funding that different counties are getting, any idea if they're kind of using some of these ideas toward implementation at schools?
I can talk about that. So at first, Creston had this this deadline to follow to use the funding that they were given for COVID. So we, in the slideshow, we showed those two areas that the school wanted to utilize as an outdoor classroom. And so we came up with ideas and presented two different schemes, the scheme 9 and scheme 3, which used the decomposed granite. They didn't do exactly like what we designed, but they used those ideas so they could get kids back in school. And they hired a contractor and they had a pretty fast turnaround. I think it was around 2 weeks, and they already had made the space, and we were really surprised how fast it was built.
Well, that's really cool. And it's probably especially because the resources were there, right? You know, I mean, you had funding to pay for it. So it made it possible.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you. That was a great presentation. Well done. And we are right on time. So we can start with our fourth speaker, John Chen, and colleagues. Dr. Chen, I don't know.
Sorry.
Okay.
Got it. After all this time, you would think. So thank you. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering, and I'm a part of a bigger team composed of Cal Poly, Purdue, and University of Texas, El Paso. We call our project the Success Project, and you can see the acronym in the upper corner there. And the original goal of our project, which started 5 years ago, was to try to understand what factors beyond intelligence or talent may be at play in ensuring student success, engineering student success. We've invested a lot of time and effort to help students learn topics and help them study better, but we have not given very much time to what we call the non-cognitive or affective factors that contribute to success. So that was the original goal of this project. And the way we chose to do this was to develop an instrument that could measure these non-cognitive affective factors. And we built this instrument looking at constructs in literature that had demonstrated evidence in predicting academic achievement. Usually that was grades or retention, or out of those constructs, we tested a bunch of them, and through confirmatory factor analysis, we ended up with 28 factors that were drawn from the constructs that are listed here in bold, and you can read them for yourself. So far, we've given this survey to over 3,000 undergraduate engineering students, and actually almost half of those are here at Cal Poly that have taken the survey. And when the pandemic hit, we kind of thought we had a lot of things that are in this survey that could actually tell us about what the students were experiencing during the pandemic. And let me tell you a little bit about what we've done with the survey, what we found. We first did a comparison just to see how well it can predict students' GPA. And we compared it in a head-to-head competition with the SAT scores. And what we found was that when we added SAT scores to demographics, that explained about 10% of the students' variance in GPA. And that's consistent with previous studies that have looked at the SAT. When we added our survey results to demographics, we were able to explain about 26% of the variance in GPA. So that gave us a lot of confidence that we're onto something, that these factors are actually quite important. And more importantly, most of these are malleable factors, so that we can, through interventions, modify these and help more students to succeed. We've also looked at clusters, using clustering to see if we could put students into certain clusters. And it turns out we can, and I won't talk about the results very much, but I'll show you the clusters that we have found. And you can see here that, don't worry about what they mean, but maybe pictorially, just to see that there are 4 distinct clusters. And I'll give you a brief tour. This cluster 2 has a lot of factors that are positive. So they're on the positive side compared to the average for the entire sample. And a lot of these factors suggest that they will be successful in their academic studies. And whereas clusters 3 and 4, they have a lot of factors that are on the negative side. And so these factors would predict that they might be struggling. And when we compare that to their GPAs, and we found that that was true, that the cluster membership does predict their GPA. And even more importantly, we found that cluster membership can predict the trajectory of their GPA. That is the direction that their grades are changing over time. So I'll now talk about what we did for this study. And what we thought we could do with our survey instruments is to measure generally students' well-being. And specifically, we thought we would look at stress and wellness. Well-being has been studied. There's a vast amount of research out there for studying well-being in the general population. And generally, the definition, the easiest definition is that people who are doing well and feeling good have a high sense of well-being. And in universities and academic settings, we tend to focus on the doing well part, good grades, good progress towards graduation. And only recently have we started really thinking about the feeling good part. And another way to conceptualize well-being is to think about the general definition, which is the pursuit of pleasures and the avoidance of suffering. And those generally speak to extrinsic factors. There's also a part that says everyone wants to actualize to their full potential. And that speaks to more intrinsic factors. And finally, when we think about well-being, we need to talk about the context in which it takes place. And in our case, we're talking about undergraduate engineering studies. And I'm not proud to say we have a culture that is characterized by a lot of stress, a very heavy workload, and students that have expectations of lower grades compared to their peers. So it's not a very happy culture. I've heard it described as a culture of suffering and shared hardship. And when I saw that, I thought that was exactly what I experienced as an undergrad, and I think what many of our students experience now. So we have to take that into consideration as well. So in our case, when we think of the general definition of well-being and also this engineering context, we wanted to capture behavioral, cognitive, intrapersonal factors, as well as some social competencies to measure well-being. So based on previous work in well-being and the things that we measure in the success survey, we chose 10 factors that form 2 indexes. The first one we call the stress. And what's in that stress index are stress due to conflicts, stress due to frustration, stress due to life changes, and the student's reaction to stress. And finally, we also added in test anxiety. In the wellness index, we included the meaning and purpose, gratitude, engineering expectancy, mindfulness, and stress support. Okay. So we went through our survey, and we've given the survey now for 4 years in a row, and we pulled out the data. But first thing we thought we'd do is look at how do these indexes change within a student over time. So a longitudinal study. And it turns out we looked through all our data. We found that 28 students have completed the survey in 4 consecutive years. So they started as first-year students in 2017, and they've taken the survey 4 years in a row. So over time, what we show here is the box plot of the 28 students. And you can see during their first year, they have a somewhat lower stress level. The mean level is about 4.4, and then that rises and stays about constant second, third, and fourth year. And then on their wellness scale, generally, it's pretty constant throughout the 4 years that they've been with us. And when we do statistical tests across the different years, we found none of the year-to-year differences were statistically significant. Okay. So now I'll show you more of the cross-sectional data. So all of our survey over time. And this first one shows the stress index. And I'll give you, it's a very busy plot, so let me give you a little tour. Given the survey 4 years, and each one is shown here connected by dots, but it's not meant to show time or development. It's just showing within each year, the students who were first year students, second year students, third, and so forth, who took the survey. So for example, down here in the light blue are the data, the surveys from 2018. And in that year, we only gave the survey to first year and second year students. And the numbers shown here are the sample size. So 372 first year students took it that year, and 53 students took it. 53 students that were second year students took it. And then 2019, and then 2020, pre-pandemic, there's a 3 years, and you can see the data all cluster right around here and generally show the same thing as what we saw longitudinally, maybe a little bit lower on the first year, rises to a constant level. And then if you stay longer than 5 years, you start to experience a lot more stress. That's what we're seeing in our data. And of course, I think all of you are staring at this plot up here and wondering what that data is about. And you won't be surprised. It turned out that there was a group of students that we hadn't surveyed, and we held off until April 2020 to survey them. And we found their stress levels were extremely high. So not surprisingly, when we shifted to online learning. And you might be asking, what about now? What about this year in 2021, when students have things have settled down, we have all become expert at online teaching. And that's this blue line right here. And you can see it does fall back to the general levels, maybe a little bit higher. We haven't done the statistical, the test to see if it's significantly higher. Okay. Now I'll show you the wellness index, and you'll be really surprised. I'll give you a warning right now, and then we'll talk about it. So there's the same set of data for the wellness index, and all of you are staring at this data and thinking that a bunch of engineers must have gotten this data wrong. We double checked, and sure enough, during the pandemic, the onset of the pandemic, students experience extremely high stress, but they also experience extremely high wellness, which is surprising. We hypothesized that this feeling of high wellness resulted from the fact that students went home, saw many acts of maybe heroism even, and really were nurtured by their families and really experienced this high wellness. You can see the other pre-pandemic years, 2018, 19, 20, they are lower and about constant, just like we saw for the students that were studied longitudinally. And finally, again, you might ask, what about now, 2021? And sadly, that's this blue line down here at the bottom, and that's during this academic year. And you can see that in general, the students are experiencing lower levels of wellness, and especially the first and second year students, extremely low levels of wellness. So that might be, these two might be groups of students that we really want to work with coming back in the fall. So in summary, we've extracted 10 non-cognitive and affective factors from our survey and grouped them into 2 indexes to measure wellness in our students. The cross-sectional analysis showed that all the students experienced extremely high stress, but also extremely high wellness at the onset of the pandemic. And then during the current academic year, students are experiencing slightly higher stress and lower wellness, especially our first and second year engineering students. Okay, with that, I think I will stop and take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. We have just 1 minute left for any questions. Your findings were certainly interesting with both stress and wellness. I think that was, I think, surprising to me too, that students felt well, but you came up with a good rationale for that. I'm not seeing any hands raised, or does anyone want to make a comment or question in the last few seconds? Anyways, well, thank you very much. I think that's really interesting. I'd say it was a little shocking for me to hear that engineering students have a culture of suffering and shared hardship. I have a son who is a Cal Poly engineering student, but anyway, so that's there's probably many disciplines that might feel the same way. So it's quite interesting.
If Peggy, if I could, I want to give a shout out to Michelle Kurse and Jocelyn G. They're here. They did all of the work. I just asked them for analysis, and they put up with me and did all of the hard work, the many hours of analysis behind this. So thank you to them. Great.
Students as well?
Yes,
Yay.
From statistics.
Oh, great. Wonderful. We're happy for that. Happy for that student participation. Alrighty. So we are ready now for our next presentation. That would be Megan Lamberts-Burnt. So from CLA, if you want to go ahead and share your presentation and go ahead and begin.
Yes, and it's actually with my co-author, Dr. Anuraj Dhillon, as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
So hi, everyone. Like it was just mentioned, my name is Megan Lamberts-Burnt. I'm an assistant professor in the Communication Studies department. Oh, Anu, you're muted.
Okay, sorry for that.
It's okay.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Dr. Anuraj Dhillon, and I'm also an assistant professor in Communication Studies department.
And we'd first just like to thank the Center for Health Research for allowing us the opportunity to present our project today titled Struggling to Keep It All Together in the Pandemic, Working Parents' Experience During the SHE Session. This project was funded by the Center for Expressive Technologies. I'd first like to begin with our purpose of how we got to this project. Anu is an interpersonal communication scholar, and I'm an organizational communication scholar. And we wanted to combine our areas of expertise to offer a more holistic understanding of how working parents experience the pandemic while balancing work and life. This is not often done in communication studies between both of our sub areas of discipline, yet Anu and I kept seeing links between our work that deserved a partnership concerning experiences as parents during the pandemic. Additionally, we are both mothers of 2 children, and you could probably hear my baby in the background right now. And we're also trying to keep it together. So we essentially wanted to know how others were experiencing the pandemic, what relational maintenance strategies were used, as well as how others were, in relation to their personal relationships and job satisfaction. Finally, our investment in this topic was also based on our experiences as women and how COVID disproportionately impacted women, with 1.1 million individual job losses reported back in September of 2020, 800,000 of which were from women. And that disparity has only continued. I'm just using that statistic because that was part of our paper at the time. So with the prevalence of sex roles, where oftentimes childcare is primarily seen as a woman's responsibility, women may have been feeling overburdened, citing a lack of childcare as a reason to leave work. Therefore, we essentially sought to answer the following question: how have relational and organizational support facilitated working parents' work-life balance during the pandemic?
So to understand the role of relational support during the pandemic for working parents, we employ a theory of resilience and relational load. So TRRL asserts that individuals accumulate these positive emotional reserves or emotional capital that buffers them and their relationships from stress during times of adversity. Relational maintenance strategies encompass these routine and strategic pro-social experiences, some verbal and nonverbal actions and behaviors that help individuals preserve their relationships. And TRRL suggests that people who regularly maintain their relationships, they build this emotional capital, which helps them better able to manage stress and experience better personal and relational health. In fact, prolonged maintenance makes couples resilient, such that they perceive tough times as less stressful because they can draw from this accrued emotional reserve that they've developed over time and help them thrive during the tough times. Recent work, in fact, has found that more maintenance received from one's partner is associated with healthier regulation of physiological stress in terms of cortisol, less conflict, and better satisfaction from work-life balance. And guided by these assertions, we propose that working parents who experience this greater relation maintenance from their partner on a daily basis during the pandemic may feel unified against this stressor, and they may appraise their relationship as more satisfying. And they also might feel this greater self-efficacy to balance work and life better and perform better at work, which is why we propose a hypothesis which is stated on our slides.
So the effect of the pandemic on working parents' personal and professional lives really could not be understood without considering the support, or we often saw the lack thereof, from their workplaces, especially for women. As previously mentioned, women have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Many job losses have been a result of collapsing female-dominated industries, including, but certainly not limited to, hospitality, education, entertainment. But yet many women are actually opting to choose out of their work due to a lack of childcare or resources from their organization. And so we essentially asked the following research question as a result: how does sex relate with satisfaction from work-life balance? Additionally, working parents are dealing with many more challenges, but those who perceive a good relationship with their organization and the accommodations offered would likely report higher levels of job satisfaction. And so to better understand that, we asked the research question of how are organizations accommodating working parents' needs during the pandemic?
So we collected data from 271 working parents, and they completed an online Qualitative survey, which contained items, open-ended questions, and items pertaining to maintenance strategies, satisfaction with relationship, job, and work-life balance. The inclusion criteria was that they must have been working during the lockdown, and they must have had one child under the age of 10 living with them. And as you can see, majority of our participants were female, though the disparity is not huge, white, heterosexual, married, full-time employed, and from California. And the average relationship duration of our participants was 8+ years, and most of them were married. Here is the list of all the measures that were included in there, including relation maintenance strategies, which was measured using the 7-dimension scale. But we had to drop 2 because the alpha Cronbach reliability were not as good. So we resorted to positivity, openness, assurances, social tasks, and shared networks. And the rest of them are listed up there. I'm going to run through this because we are running out of time. Moving on to the results. So we used Hayes process models to test our hypotheses and answer our research questions. And as outlined on our slides, our data are consistent with most of our hypotheses, thus lending support to the tenets of TRRL, which suggests that working parents whose partners engaged in making their conversations cheerful, or who were disclosing feelings, or helping with household chores, or talking about family and friends, reported being more content with the relationship, job, and work-life balance. And possibly due to this greater relational maintenance, these parents might be less stressed or have had less conflicts, and in general, more positive emotions, which may have spilled over to promote efficacy in doing their job more effectively and balancing the situation better. Results also unfortunately revealed that women were less satisfied with their work-life balance, and they were also more stressed. Essentially, our results reveal that this second shift has not gone away. Rather, the pandemic has only amplified the impact on women. Unfortunately, she-cession prevailed among working women as well. And lastly, compared to other dimensions of maintenance, assurances had this weaker negative correlation with satisfaction from work-life balance. So the further exploration identified that sex interacted with the assurances to predict satisfaction from work-life balance. And we show it here with the moderating graph right here. So the interaction results reveal that for working men, higher assurances was associated with greater work-life balance, but for women, the effect was opposite. And such a result may seem surprising, but yet, as we've quoted the national data earlier, that women lost a lot of jobs during this time, and women were actually 4 times more likely than men to drop out of workforce during this time. So while assurances from one's partner may have been helpful, perhaps women felt more concerned with the growing statistics of job uncertainty among women nationwide.
So to better understand how organizations accommodated employee needs during the pandemic, we asked the following open-ended question. Essentially, has your organizations accommodated your needs? And the following themes emerged. The first theme that emerged was a need for childcare, or need for care in general, and things such as childcare or healthcare needs. Additionally, another theme that emerged was flexibility, either to work from home or flexibility in hours worked. Additionally, we had quite a few responses that cited some form of like proper sanitation was a part of the accommodation of their organization, such as disinfecting surfaces in the workplace or providing the necessary physical like suits and things that they need, or masks and face shields and things like that. However, the largest theme that we did see, and this kind of aligns with much of what Anu was saying, is no accommodations have actually been made, and that has been very much so a struggle alongside this SHE session. Additionally, in terms of job satisfaction, we proposed that job satisfaction would positively associate with satisfaction from work-life balance. This was supported and confirms previous research. However, one thing, because I know we're kind of running out of time here, one noteworthy finding was that how this potentially could be explained was this idea of feeling gratitude, especially during the time of the pandemic when so many other individuals have lost their work. And so what we saw was this idea of appraisal-centered coping, which essentially, measures your situation against other situations. And if you are feeling just happy to have a job at this time, that's going to be a helpful coping mechanism. However, myself, Dr. Dillon, and many previous scholars would actually argue that the prolonged use of appraisal-centered coping can actually lead to burnout. And so there's just only so much, if I could speak more informally, sweeping underneath the rug that you can do, that this coping mechanism would actually help you in the long term. But that would also require some future research, which is what Dr. Dillon and I are hoping to do.
In order to conclude, we found that relation maintenance strategies are pertinent to increasing relationship, job satisfaction, and satisfaction with work-life balance. But as we saw, that results also uncover this effect of disproportionate weight that women have been carrying, and this continued during the pandemic as well. And organizations need to continue to strengthen their relationship with their employees, maybe develop some kind of reserves, just like in personal relationships, on an ongoing basis, by instituting certain policies which would consider their perspectives, maybe building trust, addressing their needs, such as lack of childcare, flexible scheduling, etc. Thank you for spending the time with us. Thanks. And questions?
Thank you for another very interesting side of COVID. So, that was excellent. So we open this up for questions, and we have about 2 minutes for those. I don't see any in the comments.
Denise, I can see her hand up.
Oh,
Hi, Denise.
How are you? Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. I'll try to be fast. I had 2 questions, actually. One, I wondered what happens when the intersection of race enters the conversation, but the second one was more focused on issues of class. One of the things I heard early on is that women, particularly in the hospitality industry, were experiencing an incredible amount of harassment. People saying things like, take off your mask so I can see your smile, I'll give you a tip. Let's earn this tip by me seeing your pretty face. So how does an industry assist in establishing a workplace environment that would be more helpful to women when the issue is really about broader societal norms and concepts and narratives around gender?
Well,
I would say, in terms of, thank you, Dr. Eisen, for that question, a really important question. I would say first, accommodating like basic needs as an organization, which we're seeing from our data is not even being met. So it's kind of like just accommodating childcare needs and healthcare needs, all the things that we previously mentioned that were infrequent. And so I think starting there, but then also then building in, like Dr. Dillon was talking about, this reserve of understanding the unique challenges faced based on social identity markers. And so I think it's starting bare bones with just the basic human needs, like Maslow's hierarchy needs, our lower order needs, but then also at contributing to what is impacting based on our social identity markers as well. And do you have anything to add there? Because I know that the breakdown based on class and race too was
Yes,
more
in terms of the race, we definitely think that race has something to play a part in there, especially also when we think about like cultural expectations and how they differ across races and across ethnicities and across cultures. Something we have proposed as a RISCA proposal, because we want to go further deep into this topic and see if there are like any interactions or intersectionality. How is it affecting the situation? Like, given our preliminary data, we did not definitely did not see across race, but being a person of color, I certainly have felt differently, probably from a lot of my other white colleagues out here. My experiences might be different from all of yours, given the cultural background or cultural, I would say, then not just the background, like the upbringing was more like taking on more as a woman. I come from India, and like still the expectation is that the women take on most of the responsibility in the house, even while you're working outside. So that definitely would be affecting people who are coming from these different cultural notions, and that will play a part. And we are hoping that we can find more out about this information, about this. One more thing that I want to highlight here is also about the academic mothers. In fact, we did a follow-up of our previous study, and then we have interviewed 7 academic mothers. And certainly their needs are different, and hopefully we can answer Dr. Jane Lear's question that she posted, that what are the recommendations for Cal Poly. We haven't analyzed that data yet, but we are hoping to look at some themes out there. And certainly one thing that has come out is the childcare needs. All the working mothers, especially in the academia, do need childcare and flexible scheduling, because that would help us put forth. And that is one way that organization can show us that they care for us as a working academic. So that's all for now.
Thank you so much. Fabulous presentation, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent presentation and great discussion afterwards as well. Thank you. All right, so we're on to our last but not least presentation by Julia Alber et al. So take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt that discussion. I kind of wish we could just keep going on that, but I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Julia Alber. I am in the Department of Kinesiology and Public Health, and I'm also presenting here on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. David Askey from Communication Studies and Dr. Hunter Glanz from Statistics Department. We also had 2 wonderful students that are undergrads, Anna Estrada and Erica Martz, who actually analyzed all of the data for us. We're both in public health. So today I'm going to be taking you through, this was an exploratory study to inform a larger survey that looked at the reported impacts of COVID-19 on health and health behaviors, as well as individuals' trust in social media for COVID-19 information. So I really want to spend a lot more time on the results. So just briefly, background, we all can agree and know that COVID-19 has really altered the way we see our normal life through changes in our employment, lifestyles, and likely a lot to do with our health behaviors. And there is a good possibility that social media may be playing a role in shaping our beliefs and behaviors as they relate to COVID-19, how we perceive COVID-19, whether or not we engaged in COVID-19 preventative behaviors such as wearing a mask, getting a vaccination, which may have in turn also impacted individuals' health and life. So we asked 2 different questions on, well, one, we wanted to know if we just ask people out front without giving them a prompt or response options, what would they say were the impacts of COVID-19 on their health and health behaviors? And we were also interested in what sources of information they were using for COVID-19 and if they had thoughts about using social media for information on COVID-19. So really the purpose of this study, this was a smaller study that we did to actually inform a larger survey that we just started analyzing the data on, but looking at how people reported effects of COVID-19 on their health behavior, and then their trust in different sources. We also, like the last study, used a Qualtrics survey, and we also used Qualtrics panels to collect the data in December 2020, just to give you context, as beliefs have changed over time related to COVID. But we got a sample of about 103. We used quota sampling to match up some of the demographics with the United States. And this was mostly a qualitative study in that they were open-ended questions that asked individuals in general, how has COVID impacted your health? how has it impacted your engagement in different behaviors related to health? And we generally also ask them about their beliefs about COVID, where they get information about COVID, and their beliefs about social media and COVID-19. And then we had some closed-ended questions that were just related to demographics. And we did a thematic analysis of those qualitative analysis, or I should say my students did that very well. And we did calculate some frequencies as well. So I want to take you through, just to give you demographics. Again, it was just a sample of 103, so it's smaller, but it was across the United States. And we had an almost equal split male, female, and our race ethnicity matched up in terms of the percentage for the general US population, because we did use quota sampling. But I would note that most of our participants had above a high school education, so about 74% did. And I did want to mention, because we did look at political affiliation differences and some of the things that came up, that we had about 31% that identified as Republican, but a higher number that identified as Democratic, about 46%, and then about 17% that identified as independent in terms of their political affiliation. So in the first question, we asked people to just tell us, how has COVID impacted your health? And what was kind of interesting is a lot of people said it didn't at all. That was about 48% just said it didn't have any effect on my health or didn't affect me. But I will note that there were some people that said, well, it didn't affect me, but it might have affected other people or my family members that are at higher risk. We did see almost 30% in some way or form brought up that it impacted their mental health in a negative way. So that was one of the main negative parts that people brought up. In general, we asked about their health. In terms of health behaviors, it was interesting because we did see a lot of people who would say, my physical activity has decreased, and we saw a few people talk about it impacting their ability to go to the doctor or not eating as well. But then we saw people who said it was actually good for their health behaviors. So for example, we saw an individual talk about, I've actually had more time to exercise since COVID-19 has started. So there's both positive and negative effects in terms of health behaviors. In terms of trust in sources, we did, before asking them about social media, we wanted to just know, who do they trust for health information? And the top one that came up was TV. And this could just generally them saying television or a news station. We saw individuals talk about national news stations like CNN or local news stations. And then the second most common was governmental sources. What was interesting is very few people said that a healthcare provider or social media, which I don't know if that was surprising, but the healthcare provider one was a little bit more surprising to us. And I will mention that we did categorize these and look at differences between political parties. And in general, there wasn't any difference between those who said TV between the different political parties, but we saw a lower percent of Republicans listing government sources and healthcare providers as a trusted source for COVID information compared to Democrats and independents. In terms of social media beliefs, we asked them generally, what are your thoughts about social media during COVID-19? We wanted to see general thoughts overall about social media. There were some positive that people thought, oh, it can help us support, or it's useful in getting information. However, I would say there was a more negative aspects about social media. We saw almost 40% in some way mention that social media is not trustworthy. And some even believe that it can be harmful when it comes to COVID-19. And we also did ask individuals how they could tell if information about COVID was real on social media or accurate. And many people said you just can't. There isn't a way to tell if it is accurate or not. So overall, there seemed to be a lack of trust for social media when it came to COVID-19 information. I did want to bring up that we just generally asked about COVID-19 beliefs. And it really varied across. There's people who thought it was real, it was scary, they were worried about it getting worse. But at the same time, we saw individuals say that it's overblown, it's over-exaggerated. We even saw people say that they didn't believe it was real. And we did see a higher percentage of Democrats talk about COVID-19 as being real and threatening versus Republicans. And more Republicans in general were mentioned that COVID information is not reliable. So those are overall what we found that we thought were really interesting in the qualitative results. I want to mention that we collected this data in December, and things have definitely probably changed when it comes to our information about it. And we collected this data once, we didn't track it over time, and it wasn't a random sample, even if it was national data. In terms of next steps, we are really excited because we did use all of these qualitative responses to create a larger survey, and we used a lot of those to create response options. So we just collected data from over 500 adults across the US, and we're currently analyzing it. And now we're actually looking at those relationships between COVID-19 behaviors like getting vaccinated, wearing a mask before and after getting vaccinated, and how that related to different demographics, trust in other sources, and their general COVID-19 beliefs. And with our previous, same thing as our previous presentation, we also received funding from the Center for Expressive Technologies and Center for Health Research. And if you don't know that, they actually have their application open again if you want some seed funding related to one of their topics. It's actually closing tomorrow. And that's all I have, is if anyone has any questions.
Great, thank you very much for another really interesting and enlightening presentation. So we have 4 minutes, I think. Yeah, 4 minutes to take questions. On that. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Or yes, Denise.
Yeah, so sorry, I wasn't typing fast enough to get it in the chat. But I was really struck by your comment around social media and people feeling like they don't trust it that much, but we know it has incredible influence on the ways in which people think about political and social issues. So I wonder if you think people differentiate between messages they think they're receiving from social media versus messages they feel like they're receiving from a friend or a trusted group or source that were the folks who posted to them on social media?
Yeah, I would say that we have asked about that specific, like if it was who was actually the source of that information. And I would say that both of them were actually kind of untrusted in terms of what we saw with COVID-19, that they were ranked really low if it came from a friend or a family versus general social media. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of distrust in general about COVID-19. And even like what was interesting in the larger survey, they were even distrustful of healthcare providers, which is not common that we found. So I think there's a general distrust around COVID-19 information if it's from social media and not regarding who it's from in general, which a little bit alarming from public health and how we try to convince people to do things, especially if we're going to use social media.
Thank you.
You know, I had one comment on the, that you were surprised that the healthcare, advice from healthcare was ranked not very common. But I also know that we were all discouraged from going to our healthcare providers during COVID. It's like, make a phone call, do something else. So in a way, I think it is kind of interesting that a lot of, there was reduced potential interaction, I think, for many people with their healthcare. It was recommended you don't come to the doctor's office unless you really, really need to. So anyways, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we actually did look at in the larger surveys, we could look at that if they did see a decrease in their access to healthcare provider and how that related to what sources they trusted. But yeah, and it's really interesting just in general, because we didn't ask about access, we just said, who would you trust and which sources would you trust? And healthcare providers were just not as high as what I've seen personally with other surveys when I'm asking about trust in health information. But definitely something I can explore. So thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments? I had one more on the kind of distrust of some of the government, and maybe I misinterpreted this, but like from the CDC. But I think there was a little confusion from the CDC. So and I can't remember at what time frame that was in relationship to your survey, but because I know for me personally, I always trusted the CDC, but then it seemed like we were getting some, and we found out potentially politics were interfering with some of the messages. So I can kind of sympathize with the challenge for that.
Yeah, we did generally we did categorize it into government sources, which came up as the second most common, but that we did see people who did specifically bring up the CDC, but they may have also just said like their local health department or their state as well. And I think both, even with the healthcare providers, this is the issue of uncertainty that we didn't know yet, and we were just going based on what we knew. And I think that led or possibly led to distrust in those sources.
Mm-hmm. And confusion. Yeah. All right. Well, we are at the end of our seminar, and I just wanted to, whoops, excuse me, there's my timer. I wanted to thank all the speakers. Some I know have left because they had classes to teach, but I think this just is a small representation of the incredible work that's going on at Cal Poly, and I'm really so proud to know and hear of what you're doing and the impact Cal Poly is having on advancing science within this pandemic. So please do, if you get a chance, read the other abstracts that are posted on the links, and also there you can find contact information for all the presenters. So if you had further questions, you could contact the individuals directly. But this will be finalized, the recording, and that will also be posted on the shared drive and also on the Google Drive, so everyone will have access to all that. So once again, the Center for Health Research is just thrilled to have had this opportunity to bring people together, and I think it's been really, really fun to hear all the diverse topics presented. So again, thank you. It's been great. All right, bye-bye.